Welcome to Core and Bath Conversations, a podcast series dedicated to adoption, fostering and kinship care. We ask children's social care professionals and experts by experience to join us to share with us and you, our listeners, their experiences, reflections and knowledge. I hope you enjoy.
Hello and welcome to the Adoption and Fostering podcast. This is the introduction to the July 2024 issue of the journal. That's volume 48, issue 2, which is out now. I'm Jo, Core and Bath's publishing manager, and I'm here with Dennis, our editor-in-chief. So we're just going to do a quick run through the table of contents, give you an idea of what's in the journal, what's been published this time. So Dennis, your editorial focuses on child-to-parent violence this time. And I know this subject is mentioned in one of the articles in this issue, and also that it's still rather taboo.
Yes, so the kind of editorial was inspired by the first article in our issue, which is from Maureen Duncan, Pascal Fearon and Matt Wilger, and it's called A Qualitative Exploration of How Adoptive Parents Experience the Direct and Indirect Trauma of Their Child's Early Maltreatment. And actually, child-to-parent violence was one of the themes that came up when they interviewed adopters, which kind of scoring high on kind of PTSD.
Right.
On a PTSD scale, so quite distressed adopters. And that topic came up. So I thought, this is actually a good topic to look into. And it still seems to be that there's a lot of shame about it. That's why people don't seek help, for instance. And so it ties in with that article.
Yeah, I mean, it's a significant number of families that they seem to think are affected by this. But as you say, it's often not talked about.
Yeah, I think it's also a problem is how we define it, I suppose, because there was one of the articles kind of nicely summarized that there are quite a few prevalence rates, but they range from, I think, 0.6 or something to somewhere around 60%. But then some people really just define it as kind of physical violence, and other kind of include more like other types of violence, also kind of emotional abuse type as well. So that might explain some of the differences there. But we kind of need a proper definition of it. And then obviously people affected by it need to come forward. I think Adoption UK, it came up in not this year's, but I think last year's Adoption Barometer, it came up. I think it was 65% who reported they had experienced child-to-parent violence, and I think 35% or so listed it as kind of the top distressing things, or top 3 significant challenges is what was listed as by 35%. So also showing that if it occurs, it's something that it can be quite distressing, and I guess that is mirrored in the article there, where they had people who score with high PTSD scores, so kind of high levels of distress anyway, and child-to-parent violence came up as a topic. Also, I think that shows how severe of a topic or severe of an issue it can be in families where it occurs to a sense of severity. And I think in that particular article, some of the quotes really, really show how severe it was. I've just written down if you and the first 2 I should add are from 2 different participants, but they are incredibly similar. So one was saying, I remember lying in my bed and thinking, is he going to come here and kill me? And the other one was, I've thought we could quite easily end up as newspaper headlines from her having killed me, or her or both of us in some way, shape or form, because she's angry. So that's kind of very severe fears. And I think another one I wrote down was, she talks a lot about making me bleed, cutting me. It's about being on high alert and thinking what could go wrong. It illustrates kind of the level of fear and kind of violence we're talking about, probably. And I read another article, which unlinked to this one, where it was something around being pinned to the wall with a mattress. So it's quite severe instances we're talking about. It's not like we're not talking about those toddler tantrums who are hitting out, which is quite normal in a certain developmental stage, right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I mean this is often older children as well, where it's not like a toddler where, as you say, it's developmentally expected and it's not going to cause a problem for the adult. And you know, in your editorial, there have been recent scoping reviews about the subject, and that non-violent resistance seems to perhaps be a promising approach. It wasn't something I'd come across before.
Yes, and are we allowed to say that there might be an article on that coming up in one of the future issues?
Well, that's good to know. I'd be interested to learn more.
um, it's kind of the way I understand it, because, and mind you, I'm not an expert on that, but
Yeah,
I think it's more coming from more like of this socio-political line
right.
of thinking. So
Yeah,
it's kind of by these kind of non-violent resistance political actors, I think what inspired it.
mm, right.
And there are different elements to it, and I think one important element is that you have a support network who you inform about any instances of violence, and you
Right.
communicate that to the young person basically. And
Mm,
I think it might have been in that study that when the parents were doing that, that the young person was quite taken aback by it, that, oh,
mm,
why are you informing these people, why are you taking this kind of out of the
yeah,
family and letting others know? So it
yeah,
seems to be quite have an effect. So it's about, and those people can be grandparents, or it can be neighbors, or it can be
yeah,
family, or whoever you trust with that topic.
yeah.
And it's basically calling them, telling them, well, this happened. So it's kind of breaking the silence, and it doesn't stay within the
Mm,
family. You communicate to someone else, and then the young person knows, someone else knows.
yeah.
And I think the way I understood it is that also then these people address it with a child, that, this happens.
Mm,
And then there
yeah,
are other things like a sit-in where you kind of, so as I say, I'm not an expert, but
yeah.
but also things like where the young person should think about how to address this going forward and what to do about
Mm,
it. So it has, like, I think, three or so main elements to it, and there seems to be some at least emerging
mm,
evidence that it's helpful. I think
yeah,
my
yeah,
feeling was that quite a few of the studies talk more about externalizing problems more broadly.
yeah.
But it looked like, at least, that it looks promising.
I mean, certainly the Duncan article that's from UCL, a qualitative exploration of how adopters experience the direct and indirect trauma of their child's early maltreatment. This, as you say, mentions child-to-parent violence. So, if you're interested in this subject, it's an interesting one for people to read and to look into.
Yes,
I
and
mean, certainly, I took from it that it's really the need for recognition of this in adopters and recognition of child-to-parent violence.
I think also because it's not necessarily something that suddenly occurs in adolescence, right? So
Yeah.
I think the problem, just the way I understood it, and I'm citing another article in there, the way I understood is that it gets more difficult to manage in adolescence, because obviously suddenly they can be quite tall and strong, and it's quite
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
hard, and it might get actually dangerous. And I
Yeah.
think, as with a lot of topics, and I feel like this is a repeating theme, is kind of, we need to identify that point of early intervention where we can prevent those kind of more negative downstream consequences. Like in a lot,
Yeah.
that's the same for mental health. So it's all about kind of these. We had a talk in our department from Rushika Gajwani, and she was
Mm.
talking about, from Glasgow, and she was talking about missed opportunities. And
Yeah.
I think that's a good way of putting it. And where if we miss opportunities for early intervention, there will be much more severe kind of problems down, further down the line. And if
Mm.
child
Yeah.
parents violence is already something that are there when they are much younger, and we do something about them, that's also obviously something that would be
Mm.
very beneficial to the young person, right?
Yes.
um
Yes. Yeah.
so I
Mm.
think that's why it's so important to kind of break that that taboo, and kind of that people address it and talk about it. And I think that's also why it's important to already address this when recruiting prospective adopters and saying, well, this is something, not scaring them off, right, but saying this is something that can happen, and if it happens, there are lots of other people who experience that, so please do speak out, and there's support available, but don't keep silent, because obviously it can also be I read a case example where there was a breakdown of the adoption because there was a danger to the siblings in the family. And so it can have quite traumatic consequences. Or there was one case example that actually was published in Adoption and Fostering, where a young person stabbed their foster carer, and that resulted in the death of the foster carer. Obviously, these are extreme examples. It's not something that happens to everyone, obviously, but
these are very extreme.
But I think when it happens, please do speak out, and there's help available. And also, I think there's something that if it's implemented in kind of early on in training and support, so that people know, oh, I'm not the only person and I can speak out. Because that always makes a difference, right? Knowing you're not alone in this.
Yes, and of course we should say that this obviously happens in families which don't have fostered or adopted children. I mean, it's called child to parent violence rather than child to carer violence, because I assume it was initially found just in the general population. It's definitely not restricted to looked after children in any way. But a very important subject.
I think the majority of studies for some reason are from Spain. But it's also something that occurs in the general population. But I think it's just that the risk factors that might lead to the child-parent violence are more prevalent in care experienced children. So that's why there might be a risk. I always think, like, if you're aware of the risk and you know what to look out for, then you can do something about it early on, right? So that's why it's important not to keep silent about these topics, address them. And then I'm always an advocate for early intervention, which sadly there's never enough money to invest into.
Of course.
So it's always these kind of more reactive approaches, but it's like, if we understand the risk and the mechanisms, and then we can intervene early and then actually prevent things from happening, that would be lovely.
And there's an interesting link there, I think, to the next article. Is foster caring associated with an earlier transition to adulthood for caregivers' own children? This was an author team from UCL and KCL. And there was a suggestion here that supervising social workers should maybe think about this issue and have this as part of their work and address this early with carers to prevent issues coming up in the future. So this was a study looked at, and I think it was 2,500 children living with a foster child, and compared their profiles on the big 5 transitions to adulthood, which is things like finishing school, leaving home, finding work, getting married, having children, and compared those to children who grew up without a foster child in the household. And a higher proportion of the foster carers' children kind of achieved adulthood before 30 than children who did not live with foster children. And the issue with this is that an earlier transition to adulthood is associated with poorer health and life chances. So something for carers and social workers to be aware of, perhaps.
I thought it was interesting because it's a very different topic and a very different approach, kind of looking at kind of biological children of foster carers as the target population. This is obviously a very large sample. I think the control group was 200,000 something children. So they're definitely very interesting approach, and I think something quite different as a topic. So please give it a read if you're interested.
Moving on to the next one, perhaps. Disconnected parenting. Context control and information management in single adoptive parents' social media practice. This is Mackenzie from Birmingham Newman University. So single adopters and social media, how they manage and curate their online networks. Topical, of course.
Yeah. And I think here it's nice that this is obviously a case study. So they looked at 3 kind of single adopters and how they use social media or digital media in kind of different contexts. And it was about things that came up is who they disclose what to, and what groups do they chose to disclose specific information, and also when do they disengage from social media. Or also, I think one thing was also that sometimes some group is more relevant for a certain time period, but then you kind of, because your child gets older and you kind of move on from this, it becomes less relevant. So this is actually was quite an interesting read, and also it's an opportunity for us to shamelessly promote our special edition from October 2023, the digital turn in child and family social work: challenges, opportunities, and imagined futures. And also, this was in October 2023, and also we did a podcast episode with the lovely guest editors from that special issue, where we explored how kind of digital media affects kind of social work, and is becoming relevant. So it ties in nicely with that special issue, if you want to delve into that topic more.
Absolutely. It's timeless these days, of course.
So I guess you could start with the article from Jay Mackenzie, and if you get hooked, you can go to our special issue and listen to our podcast on the topic.
Absolutely. I mean, we know that social media, it's always a thing for many social workers, many carers and adopters. It can be very helpful, significant source of support, but there are often a lot of issues and challenges around it that social workers, parents and carers do have to be aware of.
And I think it's also, I can't remember which issue on the top of my head, but it's also that's something that comes up sometimes in our legal notes.
Right,
So I know we had a legal note a couple of issues back about, I think it was the right to having a phone, I think in young people, I think it was
of course
related to. So it also comes up in various other contexts. So
and actually that does feed into a lot of recent news stories about schools and things trying to ban smartphones, aren't they, when children are on school premises, that sort of thing. So yeah, lots to interest people there. Please go and read the special edition, folks. Moving on to the next article here, we have an exploration of a TheraPlay VR-informed group as an intervention for adoptive families. This is an author team from the University of Manchester, and this was about how TheraPlay was used for support in a regional adoption agency.
The nice thing, I think, about this article is that they not only interviewed adoptive parents and captured their views, but they also conducted focus groups with professionals. So it's a nice kind of two different groups of kind of people who are involved in the wider signposting, I suppose, and use of these kind of more relational approaches. So TheraPlay is also one of the approaches that's based on attachment theory. So it's a relational approach. As if we've planned it, ties in with the final article, which is actually a systematic review on the outcomes from attachment-based group interventions for foster carers and adoptive.
Whereas TheraPlay, it was more kind of the parent and child together, but this was like groups instead.
Was also a group intervention, the TheraPlay one.
Right.
So which is quite nice, and it's nice to have a systematic review on the topic to help to better understand the evidence base, in that case of attachment-based group intervention. They were actually able to include 25 studies in their systematic review, which is quite nice.
And I mean, this is always an issue here as to exactly what evidence there is behind a whole range of therapies and interventions. So obviously the more information we can have about that, the better.
Yes, and sometimes there was I can't remember the author, was a quite recent systematic review that showed that the attachment-based intervention with the best evidence-based are not necessarily the ones that people are signposted to. It can have multiple reasons, and if something doesn't have an evidence base, it doesn't mean it's not useful, but it means it just means we don't know how useful it is. So we need to explore that, and that's where obviously research comes in to provide this evidence base. So it's nice that we have this kind of qualitative exploration of the TheraPlay intervention, and then the systematic review looking across kind of attachment-based group interventions, which is also obviously quite an economic group intervention, also quite economic way to deliver something, because obviously it's individual therapy, then you have to deliver it much bigger time effort there. So, if you can find evidence for kind of these group-based interventions, then that is lovely. It's a bit of a mixed bag of results, but I don't want to spoil it. Read it yourself. Look at the lay summary, because I don't want to deprive you of the joy of reading the article yourself.
Absolutely. And that last one, the systematic review titled Outcomes from Attachment-Based Group Interventions for Foster Carers and Adopters. It is by David. So do go and have a look at that. Obviously, the more evidence we can find about the various interventions that are available, the better for parents, carers, social workers, and of course children. So that's a very mixed bag, this edition. Do go and read, everybody, and I hope you find these interesting. We will of course be back with more articles in the October issue, so that's in progress as we speak. Thank you very much for listening, and do go visit the journal and have a read. And thank you very much, Dennis, for talking to me today about your very interesting editorial and all of these articles.
Thank you, and enjoy our July issue.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Corranbath Conversations. If you'd like to know more or listen to earlier episodes, visit corranbath.org.uk.